Mabuhay, or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo. Today's question comes from La La Land. Pat from Los Angeles asks, what is this about? Get rid of all Filipinos or we'll burn this town down. What is the story behind these anti-Filipino signs? So a few years ago, I made a quick video summarizing the Watsonville riots of California back in 1930. And this sign, along with many other anti-Filipino signs, was from that period. A very tense and violent period that in many ways is really not that different from our social and political climate today. January 19, 2018 marks the 88 years since the violent Watsonville riots of California. It was an intense period of racial violence targeting the Filipino community. A wave of violence that started in the town of Watsonville in Santa Cruz County, and it quickly spread throughout California in cities and places like San Francisco, Salinas, Gilroy, San Jose, Stockton, and many others. Mobs, or hundreds and hundreds of white men, roamed the town of Watsonville and the nearby farms with the sole intent of attacking Filipinos. These mobs dragged Filipinos out of their homes, out in the streets, where they were beaten up almost to death. Filipino homes were ransacked and peppered with bullets. Filipino-owned businesses were threatened and in this one case, blown up. And this was happening for almost a week. And within this violence, these racist riots, a young Filipino-American, Fermin Tobera, was killed, but no one was ever charged for his murder. And almost 9 decades on, justice for the victims of the riots remains elusive. Adding fuel to the fire, politicians and community leaders intensified this anti-Filipino sentiment by calling Filipinos a menace that must be deported, a menace that American people should get rid of. But how did the riots even started? Well, this all started in a dance hall back in 1930 when they saw Filipino men dancing with white women. During this period, many in the white community saw Filipino men as sexual predators. They saw Filipinos as criminals and rapists who are here in America taking away their women and stealing their jobs. After the riots, attitudes towards Asian Americans changed for the worse. Filipino immigration to the United States plummeted, and Filipino agricultural workers were quickly replaced by their employers with Mexican American farm workers. It was an attempt to divide and conquer, pitting ethnic and exploited minorities against each other. But, as you may or may not know, 3.5 decades later, in the 1960s and 1970s, Filipino-American agricultural workers would lead a multi-ethnic solidarity with Mexican-American farm workers and other ethnic minorities in what would become one of the most historic labor movements in the United States. So back to the riots, why did it happen? Why do they see Filipinos as criminals and rapists taking away women and their jobs? What was so wrong with Filipino men dancing with white women? Well, all of this was happening within the context of the Great Depression and the US occupation of the Philippines. During this period, the Filipino-American community was overwhelmingly composed of young bachelors or young men who were brought in as a cheap source of labor. So on one end of the Pacific Ocean, you have the worst economic depression in the history of the United States. And on the other end, the United States just took over the Philippines and started using it as a cheap source of exploitable land and exploitable labor. And in the midst of it all is American imperialism, taking advantage of the dire social, economic, and political situations in both the United States and the Philippines. And if you look deeper, these systems of exploitation is very similar to how the global economy continues to function today. By 1930, the Filipino-American agricultural workers were the dominant Asian labor force in the country, but they were treated badly and were paid the lowest. And on top of these labor exploitations, Filipino-Americans faced anti-immigration sentiments, intense discrimination, racism, and violence from the dominant white community. These anti-Filipino sentiments were not limited to Watsonville or California alone. And if you think about it, these anti-Filipino sentiments that led to the riots are the same anti-immigrant sentiments that we see today targeting ethnic minorities here in the United States, even coming from the White House itself. The Watsonville riots was just one of the many injustices that people of color have endured throughout history, not just Filipinos or Filipino Americans. But as Filipino Americans today in this age, it is important for us to know about our roots. It is important for us not to forget about our past and our history. And it is equally important for the rest of the United States to remember and recognize such dark episodes of history, of American history, so that we can all learn from the past, move forward, and not repeat such oppression, injustices, and violence against any community. And that is it for me today. See you next time, or in Tagalog, kita kits, and in Kapampangan, Miki Tips. If you liked this video, if you learned a thing or two from this video, help me make more videos like this by visiting my Patreon page and be my patron. Dakal pong salamat.